Hello and welcome to Inside America, the show that brings you insight and analysis of the biggest issues facing the United States right now. In today's episode, free speech, is it dying or thriving in Donald Trump's second presidency? The First Amendment is one of the most fundamental and fraught values in American democracy. Many people feel their speech is being silenced as President Trump claims to be a First Amendment champion, rescuing America from the so-called woke mob.
And I have stopped all government censorship and brought back free speech in America. It's back.
With aggressive attacks on universities, lawyers, and journalists, the president is being accused of undermining his own executive order, which calls for unfettered protection of free speech, with Democrats now accusing him of political censorship. Coming up, we'll explore how people are interpreting the First Amendment in these divided times.
I don't tell them how they live their life. They don't tell me how I live my life. I think that's very important.
And we'll discuss how the Trump administration is reshaping this beloved constitutional right.
There are at least 30 lawsuits right now against the Trump administration that make claims under the First Amendment. There's probably a new one filed every day. At the same time, I think we have to keep in mind Trump hasn't been all bad on free speech.
So while this moment is being seen as an inflection point, America has wrestled with the principle of free speech for many years. Few places have been more exposed to the moral and legal tension of the amendment quite like Charlottesville, Virginia. It's been nearly 8 years since white supremacists marched through the city's University of Virginia campus, chanting hate and violence under the banner of free speech. Clashes with counter-protesters ensued, a violent wake leaving one woman dead, dozens injured, and a nation reeling from the question, when does speech cross a line? We went to see how UVA is responding to the current crackdown on America's universities. Thomas Jefferson called this campus his academical village. He founded and designed it to give physical shape to his ideals of discussion, collaboration, and enlightenment. In 2017, white supremacists smashed through its gentility, bringing violence to the manicured lawns where they marched bearing torches and terrorizing students. The deadly Unite the Right rally ignited a national debate about free speech and the limits of the First Amendment.
Shortly after the rally, in the years following it, students were deeply shaken by it. And because the rally went forward under the banner of free speech, but that speech ended up being violent, lethal, it made the idea of free speech all the more fraught for people who were here at that time. And I think it deepened students as well as faculty's sense of how dangerous speech can be when it is accompanied by or supportive of violence.
Associate Professor Rachel Wall leads a university initiative that aims to create conversation across ideological divides, crucial in this moment when colleges across America are feeling a new kind of threat. Outside of the university, with Trump 2.0, what impact is that having on the notion of free speech on campus?
I think that there is a deeply felt sense of uncertainty among students and faculty, a sense that we are in a volatile moment in which we aren't sure what is happening or going to happen, and I think that people are being careful as a result.
Students are keenly aware that Donald Trump has his sights set on universities.
I don't feel exactly threatened. I don't feel like we have a target on our back yet, but if we keep making waves will have a target on our back like Columbia or Harvard.
Do you plan to keep making waves?
Absolutely, yes. Yes, not going to stop. And, you do what's right and you speak up for what you believe is right.
UVA is ranked first in the nation for free speech by the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression. But in this new climate, not everyone feels as comfortable speaking out.
No? Okay. All right. Have a good day. Thank you.
We spoke to international students who didn't want to appear on camera. They told us that quite simply, they're living in fear of being deported.
In places of higher education, we want individuals to feel like they have the opportunity to say things and learn and grow, and not have fear of it coming back and having consequences.
McAllen Cruff is a law student and member of the American Constitution Society. There's a lot of reluctance on this particular topic. Why do you think that is?
I think there's a lot of fear. I think there's a lot of threats going around. I think there's a lot of really nasty language being used and really, really scare tactics at the very tippy top of our government that have stopped people from feeling like they have that freedom, not only because it would bring consequences on them, but also because it might bring consequences on their neighbors, their community, their friends. So,
what goes through your mind when you hear Donald Trump say, "I'm bringing back free speech"?
I don't know. If that's what he's trying to do, he's doing a really bad job of it, I think. I think he has this idea of free speech as freedom from consequence, as he can say these awful, bigoted, hateful things and a lot of his supporters can do the same, and that people can't call him out for being hateful and bigoted. But that's not what free speech is.
Outside the world of academia, free speech is just as important, but with very different goals. While so many feel inhibited by Trump's actions, those who support him feel they can strike out more freely with their beliefs. What do you make of the state of free speech right now under Donald Trump?
My opinion is that it's better. Having to live the last 4 years that we're under an administration that was more controlling and more inhibiting of expressing yourself. I feel I can freely go and express my views and opinions. I was raised as a conservative Christian. I had a father who had no filter. He expressed himself. We always knew where he stood. I firmly believe in the same thing, that if I wanted to express an opinion, then I can do that. And I can do that freer than I could, say, 3-4 years ago. I personally have no preference whether a person, any orientation that they might have, any of the many different beliefs that people have. What I have a problem with is their beliefs overshadowing what I believe.
It's an important event on the bowling calendar, the Special Olympics. Patriotism is seen as synonymous with the right to free speech. What do you say to people who say that Donald Trump is destroying free speech?
What could you tell me in our last 4 years that really helped us have free speech?
So you didn't feel like there was free speech under the Biden administration?
It depends on what party you were. It's what you could say was free speech or not. That's the way I look at it.
President Trump seems only to be doubling down on his targeting of universities. Students across the US face an uncertain future. So, as we heard there, for some people, free speech is being saved. For others, it's being torched. And those views are broadly split along ideological lines. Right now, the favourable view skews towards Trump supporters. But across the political spectrum, the notion of free speech consistently polls as a top priority for Americans when casting their vote. David Keating is president of the Institute for Free Speech. We had a wide-ranging conversation about the state of the amendment, starting with the question of why this value is held so close by so many.
So it's part of our nature, I think. It's been a part of American culture for years, but it's also been vital for the types of reforms that we've seen over the centuries. In fact, one famous quote that I remember, one of the civil rights leaders, was that they succeeded in getting civil rights in the United States for Black Americans from Almighty God and the First Amendment, because the First Amendment allowed them to take their case to the American people. Now, there were certainly efforts at censorship by the segregated South, but the Supreme Court struck down many of these efforts to silence them.
Is it fair to say that people don't always view the First Amendment through a neutral constitutional lens, that it's a case of people love free speech until they realize that their opponents have it too?
Well, that's certainly a human nature problem. Free speech for me, but not for thee. That's, I think, part of a reaction that people have. No one likes being criticized, right? And a lot of speech might be criticism, and people don't like getting criticized, so they like to shut those people up. And unfortunately, a lot of those people that don't like criticism are politicians, and they're in a position to pass laws or put pressure on people who can, do things to you, make your life difficult through arrests or investigations and things of that nature. That's one reason why we have the First Amendment, to protect against that kind of thing.
Okay, one politician springs to mind at the moment, President Donald Trump. Can you be a champion of free speech? We were at the UVA campus recently, and international students were telling us that they are literally afraid to speak at the moment for fear of being deported and kicked out.
Yeah.
Can you be a champion of free speech when you are deporting students who are saying things that you don't like, when you're going after journalists, news organizations who are saying things you don't like?
When you're talking about someone who's not a citizen in this country, it's not clear how much the First Amendment protects those people. It's not clear if they have any rights under the First Amendment. So now, do I think that's a good idea? Personally, not. I think one of the great things about America is that it's a beacon of freedom to the entire world. And if we have students here or other visitors, I think we should give them some significant freedoms, if not the full freedoms of citizens. So I understand why students are afraid to say anything. If I were one of them, I would be too, because it's not clear what you're allowed to say right now and what you are not allowed to say by this current administration.
But doesn't the First Amendment make it clear? I mean, do you have to be a citizen of this country to be able to abide by the First Amendment, to have that right?
No, it's not at all clear. In fact, there's a Supreme Court case called Blumen versus Federal Election Commission, where some visitors, legal visitors, were here, and they wanted to simply go to a local copy shop, photocopy shop, and make signs in support of one candidate and pass them out in the park. And the government said, you can't do that because you're not a citizen, and we regulate campaign speech about candidates and elections, and the Supreme Court upheld that restriction. So no, I mean, what I think should be allowed under the First Amendment, or how I would rule if I were a justice on the Supreme Court, might be one thing. But if you look at how the Supreme Court has ruled, the answer is no, it's not clear that non-citizens have any rights, well, even legally here in the country.
What about going after law firms that represent your political opponents? Again, that seems to be very much going against the notion.
Oh, it's clearly a violation. And every court, look, it's still early in the litigation, but every court that has ruled on this to date has, smacked this down pretty hard. I mean, the opinions are very clear, vigorous in saying that it's a violation. It's actually a violation of the right to petition. We not only have the right to freedom of speech and of the press, but the right to assemble into groups as long as we do it peacefully, and the right to petition government for the redress of grievances. So it means if we have some sort of complaint, we can maybe write a letter to members of Congress or the president, but we can also go to court to file a lawsuit. And, those executive orders against law firms are totally indefensible in my view.
Well, that was going to be my next question. So are we in danger of ending up in a situation where it is essentially the government that decides who these rights apply to rather than the Constitution?
Well, no, we have a very strong First Amendment, and the courts, they're not perfect in interpreting it, in my view. They should probably go further than they have, but it's quite strong. And I think compared to any other nation in the world, we have the the best speech freedoms here generally than anywhere else.
Is Donald Trump a threat to that from what you're seeing now?
Well, look, I think all politicians are a threat. They all want to use the powers and the levers of government to try to shut down critics or punish critics or something. So, look, I'm not supporting, there are at least 30 lawsuits right now against the Trump administration that make claims under the First Amendment, at least 30. There are so many that you can't really even keep track of them all. There's probably a new one filed every day. At the same time, I think we have to keep in mind, Trump hasn't been all bad on free speech. He's done some positive things too. I'm not going to defend the indefensible because plenty of things he's done have been indefensible, but there have been some good things as well.
Like what?
Well, first is, I think I don't doubt that foreign students feel nervous about saying anything. I totally understand that. But a lot of American citizens, there was this culture of like a speech police culture we had in the United States, where if people said things, there might be online mobs trying to get them fired or their businesses boycotted and so on and so forth. I think with the election of Donald Trump, there's less fear about speaking out, at least among conservatives. Liberals, I'm sure, are feeling a bit differently, to say the least. But a big part of America, I think, does feel freer to speak. And the second thing is, a lot of social media platforms have decided to take a step back from doing censorship, or they're taking different ways of doing it. I think that's a plus, because under the previous administration, it was quite clear there was a lot of behind-the-scenes jawboning and threats to social media platforms to censor certain types of speech the administration didn't want to see happen. You know, like anything else, there's good news and bad news. The bad news is getting a lot of attention. It should be getting a lot of attention, but there's also been a few shoots of First Amendment good news here and there.
David Keating there. Now, he talked about the pressure being felt by journalists. Freedom of the press is a constitutional guarantee protected by the First Amendment, and alarm bells are ringing that it's now under severe threat. Let's discuss that with our panel today. I'm joined by Hadar Harris, who is Managing Director at PEN America, where she champions global press freedom and defends the rights of thinkers and writers everywhere, and foreign correspondent for Feature Story News, Kate Fisher. Hadar, let me start with you. So we've got action against news outlets like CBS, NPR. We've got the AP being blocked for not saying Gulf of America. How would you characterize the climate right now?
The climate is not great. You know, we've seen, even prior to this administration coming to power, a move against media outlets to try to bully them into conforming to a narrative that the president would like put forward. So just prior to President Trump taking office, ABC actually settled a defamation lawsuit that the president had brought against them for an interview that for a comment that George Stephanopoulos had made on screen. And it was widely seen as a lawsuit that most First Amendment lawyers thought was very winnable, but ABC decided, and their parent company Disney decided to settle that case before the administration came to power. Now we see the president using kind of all of the powers of the presidency to try to make sure that news outlets and journalists will shape their narrative to conform to what he wants said. So using the words Gulf of America instead of the traditional name of the Gulf of Mexico, and excluding the Associated Press from access to the White House as a result of that was one such effort. There are additional lawsuits that are pending, and there are attempts to strip funding and to, again, kind of coerce news outlets into what they wanted to do.
So, Kate, you've got, as Hadar mentioned there, ABC News settling. You've currently got NPR taking legal action. It seems like there's no consensus yet on whether to push back or surrender. Where do you think this is heading in terms of the stance that the media collectively might take?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question whether the likes of NPR are going to win out and embolden others perhaps to take that action, or, like you say, roll over essentially like ABC News did. And I think an interesting case at the moment is CBS. The Trump administration suing them over a 60 Minutes special. Of course, that's their flagship news show, saying that they edited Kamala Harris in a way that the Trump administration didn't like. And this is particularly interesting because at the same time, CBS is trying to sign a deal, a merger. It needs approval from the government to do so with Skydance Media. And so it's kind of caught in the middle of this. And some of the journalists, the key journalists on that show, have resigned over this. The chief executive news, the executive producer. So it shows there's a real, not just a wrangling between the Trump administration and these media companies, but also within the media companies, the journalists themselves, about how they feel about what their bosses are doing. And I think it's going to be really interesting to see how far NPR gets through the courts and whether that means other media companies will be less willing to roll over and really fight this.
Yeah, it's a bit of a test case, Adele.
Can I, though, note that CBS and ABC are privately owned media companies, and they're part of larger corporate conglomerates.
Yeah.
NPR, who's taken a proactive stance to sue the administration for trying to cut their funding, is a nonprofit organization, an independent organization. It's not part of corporate media.
Yeah.
And so there is a pretty significant difference in that way.
That is a huge difference, yeah.
But generally speaking, for so many things for Donald Trump, it seems like press freedom is transactional, isn't it? It's you give me what I want and I'll go easy on you. If you don't, then I won't. But that's not a free press, is it? That's nowhere in the definition of a free press.
I think that is really kind of one of the definitions of what's happening in his presidency writ large, not only on press freedom issues, but on education issues, on academic freedom issues, on a whole variety of different issues that you're seeing, even in terms of trade policy. Everything is transactional. But the fact is that we know that kind of appeasement and agreement and rolling over doesn't get you very far. It only gets you to the next stage until the additional demands are made. So.
And I think it's interesting as well. I think potentially your credibility as a news organization
100%.
is affected, which is why we've seen these resignations, because how can you hold power to account if you take the financially financially positive way out of a situation and you don't stand up for freedom of the press, impartiality, etc.
Yeah, and that credibility is something that Donald Trump has been attacking for years now, getting on for over a decade since he entered the political sphere. He's really been trying to discredit the media in the public's perception of it. And you look at what he was saying on the campaign trail, that he wouldn't mind if someone had to shoot through the fake news to reach him. So as a journalist, Kate, what kind of climate does that rhetoric create? And has it shifted in this second presidency? Has he upped the ante?
Yeah, I mean, I think just personally speaking, it is really scary. Like, I first was a journalist in the UK. I never once felt that my life was in danger or that people would attack me because of the job I was doing. And even when I first came here to be a reporter, I didn't feel that either. And it is definitely ramped up since his first, even from 2015 when he was first on the campaign trail and he started kind of pointing out the media in these rallies. It was an uncomfortable place to be as a reporter because everyone would turn around and look at you and start jeering, and it's really unpleasant, and also is another factor in potentially stopping, at least limiting press freedom, because there is what you worry about your personal safety if you try and report the truth. Because of these, and it's not just the president, what he says, his voting base repeats, and then it becomes this general feeling within certain areas of the population that the press is a bad thing, not on their side, which of course it's always traditionally been trying to hold power to account.
Yet with all of those attacks, you have a president who likes to talk to NBC News, who likes to talk to the New York Times, who to an extent embraces the legacy media. So how do you explain that contradiction?
Well, I think it's interesting that you say that, because if you look at the press briefings at the White House, which happen several times a week, and
the tone of those has shifted a lot, right? You've noticed that.
I have, I've watched many of them through several presidents now, and this is different in that, well, for a start, Donald Trump had got through several press secretaries by this point in his term in the first, but Caroline Leavitt is objectively very good at her job. She answers clearly and concisely, but she is very much speaking from her boss's playbook. She is combative with what they call the legacy media, and she very much introduces what they're calling the new media. So that front row of the White House press briefing room is a coveted place to sit, and now one of those spaces has gone to these new media outlets that she and the president are trying to really amplify. And she will get into it with the legacy media, that it is a combative room.
And Hadar, just to finish, we've got a long way to go. We're at the beginning of this presidency. Can US journalism withstand over 3.5 more years of Donald Trump?
US journalism has to. They must withstand it. And the international media also has a very important role to play. Truth is important. Truth is not necessarily something that this administration really cherishes. And yet it is the role of the media, the role of journalists to provide a level of accountability, of oversight, and of kind of peeling back what's actually happening so that people in the United States and around the world will really understand the impact of the actions of government and will be knowledgeable about what is happening in our society. So it isn't a choice about whether media is going to survive this. Journalists have to survive this, and I believe in good independent journalism to do that.
Okay. Hadar, Kate, thank you both so much for your insights.
Thanks so much.
So we'll be watching where all this goes next. We hope you'll be watching too here on Inside America.